I'm gonna fight you. It's just gonna be a fight. We're gonna fight really long and hard over those sunflower seeds, so get ready. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerner's Northern Garden. This video is going to be slightly different than the one I did last week. So last week I went primarily over the vegetables that I will be growing from seed in my garden this year. This video I'm going to be going over some of those items, but I'm going to be talking more about categories of things that I have grown, specific varieties, and specific varieties that I may not be growing this year, but I have grown previously. I wanted to do a video similar to this last year and I never got around to it. So as you could see in the last video, I store my vegetable seed collection pretty meticulously, and that way I know what I have when it comes to seed buying time. For my flower seed collection, it's been a 3 or 4 year collection process from more sources than my vegetable garden seed collection came from, and so it's a bit more mismatched. So I'm going to dump everything I have out right here very quickly and go through it and then tell you what all I have. In the bottom of any seed container for storage, you're going to find lots of seeds where they've fallen out of packets, so there's some of those. All right, so there's a little bit of a mess here and there's lots of things. I will show some photos on the screen of some of these things that I've germinated and grown over the years. I'm not going to show you the seed packet because I'm too far from the camera and it's just kind of difficult to do and with the focus and everything else. So the first thing I wanted to go over was some more seeds that I got in earlier this week from Hudson Valley. So Hudson Valley is a seed company, and this is the first time I have purchased from them. They have beautiful, really beautiful packets of seeds that you can purchase called art packs. So this is the Ruby Moon Hyacinth bean plant, which I have never grown, but a lot of people grow it as a trellis item, and it produces these really beautiful pink purple flowers. And so this is my first year growing that. Everything else I did not get in an art pack, what they call it, because it's slightly cheaper. So I did get my silver slicer cucumber, shishito peppers, which is I forgot to add in my last video. I will be growing those this year because I had them when I was in Arkansas at Jess, and she heated them up in a skillet with some light butter and served them with a little sauce just for dipping. They were delicious. So shishito pepper was definitely on my list this year, and I picked them up while I was at Hudson Valley looking online. And I picked up a purple Vienna kohlrabi, which I've never grown kohlrabi, Georgia Southern collards, Chinese kale or broccoli. I've never grown that either, and it sounds really delicious. I was looking to fill my cart for $35 so I could get free shipping like a lot of us do. And so I got a Bridge to Paris pepper, which is supposed to be really delicious sweet pepper. Danvers carrots, which is a really popular carrot variety. A celery variety, and then I mentioned I was going to grow culantro, or try again to grow culantro this year. Well, while I was on Hudson Valley's website, I saw Caribe cilantro, and I am going to try and grow that this year. This is supposed to be a cilantro that thrives even in heat, so I'm hoping, even though our springs transition from cold to hot pretty quickly, that this cilantro will thrive in my zone and allow me to have some cilantro later in the season. So I may winter sow these kind of late in the areas that I want them, and hopefully I'll be able to keep some cilantro. So that is mostly of the vegetables, the remaining vegetable varieties that I'm going to be growing, with the exception of the Ruby Moon Hyacinth bean plant. Now, as far as flowers, I have not, and I don't anticipate growing as many flowers from seed this year. I have limited space in my basement to grow things, and so I typically just do those vegetables because it's a lot of work, and I've tried to stick with varieties that I can get going really quickly in the spring after it's warmed up enough in our zone, so I don't have to dedicate that space in the basement growing a bunch of stuff when I really want to get my vegetables started early so they can produce earlier. That being said, I want to go over first the perennials that I've grown in prior years that have done really well for me. So if you are deciding to grow anything from seed that you want to last from season to season, these are some varieties I would recommend. So firstly, Echinacea. Coneflower, I have many varieties here, just the standard purple, coneflower, and then there's 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, which is this really interesting yellow one from Baker Creek. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but it has really interesting flower petals as well. And there's so many different varieties of Echinacea, too many to count. So one thing I will mention about Echinacea is I have never had success growing it in the basement trying to seed start it. So what I would recommend for Echinacea specifically is last year I winter sowed a bunch of them in the milk jug containers. I'm not sure that I'll be doing any winter sowing this year, and I didn't record that as part of my YouTube adventures last year because it was my first year doing it and I didn't know if it was going to be any success. So I did winter sow last year, and the milk carton or milk jug method worked really, really well for me. As I mentioned previously, we do have a pretty wet winter, so watering them wasn't any issue, and I got really, really good germination rate from my Echinacea seeds that I planted. When I try to start Echinacea inside, it takes really long to germinate, and then they just stay so small for so long, they're really susceptible to dampening off or just not growing very well in my case. So I'm no longer going to be starting Echinacea from seed inside, and I would recommend the winter sowing method if you're interested in starting some varieties of that yourself. So Echinacea is a great perennial to start from seed, specifically with the winter sowing method. Hollyhocks, I have never grown from seed inside either. I used the winter sowing method for hollyhocks last year. I did not get them out in my garden. They're actually overwintering in my raised garden beds. They are some of the things that I just did not get planted. And so if they survive this winter in the raised garden beds, I will stick them out in the flower beds this coming year. So a couple of my favorites was this Majorette Double Champagne, which is really beautiful. It's like a peach apricot pink color. We of course have the black hollyhocks, which I don't know if I started these from seed last year. I may try and winter sow some of these this year, so this may be a variety that I winter sow. And then we have the Queen Lilac Rose, which I really love pastel colors, and this is a white pink hollyhock. So the two that are not the black variety are dwarf varieties, so they stay really small. Hollyhocks can get really, really large. The black variety is a regular large size hollyhock, so that'll be an interesting variety I can tuck in the back of a flower bed, but these others can be mid flower bed plants. So hollyhocks is a great one to winter sow, and they are also perennials in a lot of zones. Red Hot Poker, which I picked these seeds up from Etsy 2 or 3 years ago, and you'll know that I actually removed all of them from my garden this past year because they just weren't performing like I wanted them to in the specific area. And Red Hot Poker produces some beautiful blooms, but this variety that I grew from seed bloomed once and did not bloom again, and then they were taking up space in the garden where I could put something else. And so I decided to remove those from my garden. But Red Hot Poker grew exceptionally well from seed in my basement. So that's one you could choose to grow in your basement. That's a perennial that works really well. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, which 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is sometimes called windflower. I love 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲. I have it all over my garden in several different locations, and all of the plants in my garden were grown from seed. From this seed packet right here that I no longer have any of. I ran out, but I did keep it in case I needed to purchase more and know where I purchased it from. So 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is also a great example of something you can grow from seed in your basement. Winter sowing would also probably work pretty well. Perennial Geranium grew pretty well from seed for me in my basement, so that's an option for you. You know, I have one huge plant that I ended up not relocating this fall that I was going to. It will definitely have to be relocated in the spring because it just gets massive. I'm not sure if I will keep that plant or I might get rid of it. The one that I have on hand that I grew from seed blooms early in the spring, and then it doesn't tend to bloom again. And so that may be something that I forego in my garden so I can add some color elsewhere. Dahlias, surprisingly, grow pretty well from seed. So I have several different packs. I have this one right here that I got from MI Gardener. I have a pack from Florette Flower I purchased last year, and I got a free pack from Florette when I purchased her Dahlia book last year that came out. Dahlias grow really, really well from seed. The thing that I have found about dahlias is you don't know what you're going to get when they bloom. So last year, I think I showed in a garden tour, I had a really interesting yellow variety that only had like a 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 petals on it. So it wasn't what you would think of as a dahlia. That was a flop and I threw it away. I had another really beautiful variety that I grew from seed. And so it's kind of hit or miss. You never will know what you're going to get, especially in a mixed variety, but you can have success there. And if you want to give that a try, dahlias grow really well from seed. The thing I've found about seed-grown dahlias is they do not hold their flowers very long, so they're not really good in vases, and so they look pretty good in the landscape, but the flowers themselves don't last long enough to have any use in a bouquet most of the time. And now for something I don't recommend growing from seed. That is lavender. Lavender, I have tried to grow lavender from seed before I knew any better, my first years of gardening, and I cannot get this to germinate in my house. Now, I would recommend purchasing established lavender plants. It will be the cheapest way to go in the long run. Lowe's has a perennial sale every year, and you can get almost gallon size or 3/4 gallons of lavender for like $4. So that's certainly the route you should go if you want a lavender hedge or something like that. Lavender, it takes an extremely long time to germinate. It grows really, really slow from seed, and you probably most likely will not get flowers on it its first year. And then what you'll end up with is flowers from the lavender that aren't necessarily the same color. They don't have necessarily the same habit because they're open pollinated most likely. And if you're trying to form a hedge, it will not look great because it'll be kind of blooming at different times, have different flower color, and its habit will not be as tall, wide. It won't be exactly the same. So you're going to end up with a hedge that looks kind of rough in the end if that's what you're going for, a clean, tidy lavender hedge. So I don't recommend lavender from seed. Now, once you have lavender in your garden, I have it coming up everywhere. So although I can't grow it from seed in the basement, out in the garden, it pops up constantly everywhere, and I'm constantly removing seedlings throughout the summer that have germinated over winter. Lavender specifically, if you grow it from seed, needs a vernalization period. So that's one thing to check out to see if those seeds need to be put in the freezer for a little bit. But like I said, I don't recommend growing lavender from seed. Foxglove grows pretty well from seed. You can get the digitalis version. It doesn't bloom its first year, it blooms its second year, sets seed and dies. So the only perennial foxglove that I'm aware of is one called strawberry. And I actually started 2 plants from seed, or I ended up getting 2 to germinate last year. And I have those in the garden. They were in the back around the avocado bed, as I call it, around the willow. And then I moved those to the front of the flower bed last year after we got dogs and got the yard fenced in, because foxglove is poisonous or can be poisonous to animals. And so I didn't want that in the backyard that the dogs might get into. So foxglove grows great from seed. I have had success in my basement specifically. It would probably also winter sell pretty well. Irish moss. And so you know I have around my fountain, I have a mix of green, light green and dark green Irish and Scottish moss that I picked up from Lowe's in the 6 cell packs several years ago, and it spread prolifically. Well, you can also purchase Irish moss as a seed. Now, what I would recommend for this is to scatter it on the ground and keep the area moist until the seeds germinate. It's going to grow super, super small. I have done this before. I didn't love it because it didn't match the existing moss that I had, so it was a little different, and so I ended up just not watering it and letting it essentially die. But if you want something that's similar to the moss I have around the fountain, and you have a moist area, Irish and Scottish moss, these specifically came from Outside Pride that I've ordered several seeds from before, and Irish moss does pretty well. So you can direct sow that. I wouldn't recommend necessarily starting it in your basement, or it might winter sow pretty well, but you can direct sow it directly on the ground where you need. The seeds are tiny, tiny, tiny. They're almost like dust. And so you have to spread it really carefully and then just keep the area moist. It comes right up. Daisies. Daisies grow pretty well from seed, specifically Shasta daisies. So I know not everyone loves a daisy, but one that I have really fell in love with and that I've shown on my channel quite a lot is Crazy Daisies, Shasta Daisies. So I'll put a picture on the screen of what that looks like. I started it from seed probably 2 or 3 years ago at this point. It's one of the first packets of seeds I bought from Park Seed, and it has done really well even in part sun under the magnolia that I have in the front yard. So it's my favorite because it has really frilly petals and just does a really excellent job. I may end up moving that to the backyard so it can get a little more sun, but it's one of my favorite daisies, Shasta daisies, that I've had in the garden. In fact, having grown it from seed, it's done much better than any I purchased as a perennial. Most of the ones I purchased as perennials just do not do well in my clay soil, end up dying. This one blooms all summer sporadically. It would probably bloom much better if it had more sun, and that's why I want to move it. But daisies specifically, if you find a variety you like, and there's some really interesting seed-grown varieties of Shasta daisies. Okay, so I think we can move on from the perennial type of flowers to grow from seed and transition over into the annuals that I grow usually every year. I'll tell you which ones I grow every year and which ones I have grown previously that have done pretty well. And so the first thing I want to talk about, which I have a whole video on my channel last year in January, growing geraniums from seeds. So if you're a person who loves geraniums, some people don't because they can't stand the smell. I love them, my mom loved them. She specifically loves the really bright red varieties. They grow extremely well from seed. And so I start a whole flat of geraniums myself in the spring to put in the garden because geraniums are just really expensive to purchase otherwise. They take a really long time to get going, and so they are usually the first seeds that I sow in winter. In fact, it'll be probably within the next week or so that I will get my geraniums started. So some people grow Lizianthus, and that's one of the first seeds they start for spring because it takes a super long time to germinate and those plants just sit around. So they would have already started their Lizianthus seeds. I've never grown Lizianthus. It's a really beautiful plant, but I just haven't had a place in my garden that I wanted to put any of those, and I don't have any seeds on hand, so I'm not growing any of those this year. But I am growing geraniums. I purchased my seeds from Stokes. Now, in the video I put out last year, Stokes stopped selling directly to consumers right before I put out that video, and I purchased my seeds in the winter, so November or December of the year before. And in January, they had stopped selling to consumers. So I don't have a good source for geranium seeds. But I will tell you that if you go to your big box store, you can get geranium seeds, and they germinate absolutely incredibly. They are open pollinated generally, so you will get different colors, but you will have some really interesting color combinations. So I've had really cool like highlighting around the edges of petals and stuff with my open pollinated geraniums. They grow really vigorously because they're open pollinated. You may get plants that are different sizes, but they bloom profusely and got really large for me. Some of the biggest geraniums I've seen from an annual from open pollinated seeds. If you want to grow a single color geranium, I would recommend the Maverick variety of geraniums, and they are a huge line of geraniums. I grow, this one specifically is Maverick Coral. Maverick Coral, I believe, is the variety I grew 2 years ago, and the color was a bit too orange for me. And so I have some leftover seeds that I may start, but I have a different variety that I started last year that I can't remember offhand. I'll put it on the screen below. And that's the color that I will be growing primarily again this year because I really love the apricot color blooms that it gives me. It matches the roses that I have up front as well pretty well. And so I'll be growing those again from seed in the next week or two. Coxcomb is also a really great one. It's similar to Celosia. Coxcomb forms these like flower heads that look almost like little brains, and they dry really well and are great for drought arrangements. So I have some in the house that I collected and grew 3 years ago almost, and they are still looking really great. They produce a ton of seeds, so if you have coxcomb in your garden and it goes to seed, you may forever have coxcomb in your garden. The seeds almost look like poppy seeds. They're really tiny. And they just spread everywhere. Now for germination, I had a really hard time getting it germinated. In fact, I started it early, probably February in the basement, and it never germinated. So I brought it outside in the spring and just left them in their little containers, and they actually started germinating outside finally, and I put them in the garden. I didn't get really great growth from the plants. They weren't in full sun, but I did get some nice bloom heads on them, and I used those in indoor dried arrangements along with my hydrangea blooms that I dried just for indoor decoration. So Celosia, Amaranth, Coxcomb, they're all very similar. And depending on how much space you have, I would recommend growing those because they're a beautiful addition to the garden, and you can get multiple colors and varieties in them. Marigolds, which are something that you may pick up from the garden center every year, grow really well from seed, even direct sown. So that marigolds are not something that I might start in the basement. I might direct sow them after my last frost. They come up pretty quickly and they bloom really, really well. So you can just get the generic mixed color marigolds from your local big box store. Here's one from Burpee's Best that's just mixed. I did try and grow this orange Hawaii marigold, which is supposed to be a really, really large marigold from Baker Creek last year. I didn't find that I liked it, so I really just enjoyed the generic marigolds from the big box store. They produce way more blooms than I'd seen. I haven't grown any in a couple years, but the year that I did grow it, I had marigolds coming up same year from seed. So the flower heads would set seed and then drop more seed, and then more plants would come up all in the same year. So they're very prolific and grow a lot from seed if you grow them from seed to begin with. Then we have poppies. I have several different varieties of poppies that I've grown from seed. I have not had any luck except a couple years ago I grew poppies. It may have been 3 years now, and then I decided that I wasn't ever going to grow poppies again because they look too much like a weed in the garden. And that they do, but they have really beautiful flowers. So last winter I started seeds in milk jugs, like I did some other perennials for my poppies specifically, and they came up really well. There were so many of them, but then when I went to transplant them into the garden, they all died. So I didn't get any poppies last year. So this year I'm gonna try again, and I am going to direct sow probably late February, March sometime, directly in the garden where I want the poppies to come up. And then I will thin them early spring when they start germinating. That way I don't just have a ton in one location. But bread seed poppy, this one specifically is Pink Peony, and it is really gorgeous from Floret Flower. And I'm just gonna put those somewhere that I can enjoy them this year and hopefully get some poppies. If I don't, I will have plenty of other blooms in the garden, but I want to try out this Pink Peony and get it in the garden this year if possible. And then we have the Nasturtium, which I grow every year. It is a great, great plant. It's edible. The leaves are edible. You can use them in salads. They're a bit spicy. The blooms are also edible, so they have a very peppery flavor, kind of like arugula, but maybe a little more spicy depending on what you think about arugula. And you can get them at the big box store as well. I have so many different varieties. This one's called Orchid Cream. It looks almost like an orchid bloom. It's really beautiful. Bloody Mary, which is a mix of like reds, oranges, and yellows. And several other in here. My favorite that I've grown the past few years and has grown really well. So nasturtiums typically will peter out when it gets really hot. And potentially die off depending on how much sun you have them in. I grew this Tip Top Alaska Salmon nasturtium from Baker Creek. I'm not even sure they sell this variety anymore, 2 or 3 years ago, and it bloomed profusely for me all summer in my zone 6. It had evening protection from sun, and it produced a ton of seed that I saved. And so Tip Top Alaska Salmon, it's right in that color wheel that I like so much, and it will always probably be in my garden. I'm not sure that I grew any nasturtium last year, and that was a failure on my part. But this year I am definitely going to be tucking some nasturtium probably into containers because it does really well in containers, and also just in the front landscape because it has very beautiful foliage, and this one produces flowers abundantly, and I know it will do really well up front, so I'm going to get some of those started. These start pretty well from seed in the basement if you want to do that. I did that when I had really great success with these, but they also do pretty well direct sowed. In some instances you can soak the seeds a little bit to get the hard shell softened up. But other cases, I may soak the seeds and then just plant them directly out in the landscape and get them going early spring after our last frost. Now we also have Cosmos, which I have grown last year for the first time. I didn't have great success with them, but the seedlings that I had didn't look very good when I germinated them inside. And so that's partly probably my fault. They were neglected a little bit. I'm going to try and do these again this year and give them a little more space. Last year they were kind of an afterthought and I didn't really focus on them like I should have because I had too many other projects expanding the garden that I was dealing with. And so Cosmos are also a great variety that will self-seed readily in your garden and come up year after year. So this is Double Click Bicolor Rose, which is a really beautiful variety. It's that pastel-y color that I like so much. So I will be attempting to grow these again this year. This is a variety of basil called Dark Opal. So it's not necessarily a flower, but if you're into creating arrangements, it looks really beautiful in flower arrangements because it's not your typical green basil, and it also gives a great smell to your arrangement if you're into floral arranging. And so Dark Opal is a variety I grew last year. Along with the Cosmos, the seedlings were kind of neglected and pushed aside, and so I'm going to try and grow it again this year and get a little more oomph out of it that I can actually use in arrangements. Now I have some varieties of Black-Eyed Susans that I picked up from Floret Flower that I am absolutely in love with. So these are annuals in my zone, although I did leave some plants this year in the flower beds. I did not pull them up just to see if they would come back. If you live in zone 7, 8, and higher, potentially, you can potentially have these as perennials. And so there is Denver Daisy, Prairie Sun, Sahara, and Cherry Brandy. And I grew a couple plants of these each last year. And this year I'm going to be growing more of them, I think. So one of the things about these annuals grown from seed is they don't give me the bloom count that I'm used to with propagated annuals that you will find in your garden center. Say petunias, supertunias specifically, any of the Proven Winners line that just blooms constantly all season without any upkeep and just a little bit of fertilizer. I did not get the output of flowers from these plants, and that's probably my fault. I was expecting too much from a seed grown variety, but I needed more of these in my garden, and so I'm going to plant more of these and put them in a more sun location. Where I had them, they were kind of tucked under other plants, not necessarily getting full sun all day. And so they also probably didn't produce for that reason. So that was a mistake of mine, but the flowers that they did produce were absolutely gorgeous, and they stayed really tidy and beautiful for a really, really long time, and I hardly cut on them all season. So the flower, the fact that it can stay there all season and look just beautiful is remarkable. So I'm going to be growing more of these Black-Eyed Susans from Floret this year. Another thing that I really love to keep in the garden is calendula. So calendula is also one of those things that if you plant in the garden, you will probably have perpetually during the summer and the next season because they drop seeds readily, form seeds readily, and then germinate really easily from those seeds. So one of my favorite varieties that I've grown over the year is Strawberry Blonde and Pink Surprise. But Strawberry Blonde is probably my favorite, and I picked it up from Baker Creek several years ago. So Strawberry Blonde has just this beautiful strawberry blonde colored flower, and I've actually saved seeds from this variety from year to year, and the color variation that you'll get from cross-pollination in your own garden is super, super interesting. So I'd really encourage you to save calendula seeds for your next year and continue to grow them on and get those new colors each year. It'll be random, you won't necessarily know what you'll get, but I've gotten some really interesting colors, and I'll pop those on the screen from open pollinated calendulas on my own property. Now you can also grow calendula for medicinal purposes, of course. The flowers themselves can be put in an oil and used as a salve. I have never done that specifically, but there are videos all over the internet showing you how to do that. So if you're interested, there are great health and skin benefits to using calendula in that way. So if you are interested in that, that's certainly something you could plant calendula for. I am interested in it because it is also just a very beautiful flower, and it lasts quite a long time even through our fall because it enjoys some cooler weather. So it blooms great in the summer, but will give you a little extended period of bloom there going into fall, or if you start it inside, maybe early spring, it will give you some good color as well. Now, some packets of seed I don't specifically have on me because you notice I kept those in my vegetable garden seed packets or sunflowers. So I have a really wide variety of sunflowers. I like large sunflowers that get really big, and I put some of those typically in the back mini orchard, what I call it. And then I also have some really short ones that get about waist high that I've grown over the years, and I'll put a picture on the screen of those. And also I've had some really interesting open pollinated varieties that were just planted by squirrels, probably from my own sunflowers that got open pollinated. And they were just little tiny things, maybe 2 foot tall. And those were super interesting and came out of my garden that I didn't plant. Now, one thing, if you really want to fight me in the next year, Sunflower Steve said that he might be coming out with a limited number of seeds for a limited number of people for a buy-in, and then you'll get a few seeds because he doesn't have quite enough to bring to market yet, but he is developing these super interesting varieties of sunflowers with colors never seen before on the market, like oranges and kind of like burgundy colors, and some bicolor sunflowers, and just very foliferous that have lots of petals. And I will put some pictures on the screen from his Instagram, or you can go check out his Instagram. I'll put a link to it below. And Sunflower Steve, if you're watching this, feel free to send me just a couple seeds and I will trial them out for you. But if you're not watching Sunflower Steve, for everyone else who is watching, I'm gonna fight you. It's just gonna be a fight. We're gonna fight really long and hard over those sunflower seeds, so get ready. All right. We've come to my favorite part of the video, and that is zinnias. So I have a love affair for zinnias. Last year was not a great zinnia year. I had disease onset pretty early, but the year before, and I will show a picture, although these weren't placed really well in my garden because it was my first year growing zinnias, I direct sowed Queen Lime Orange last year, and they took off with a vengeance. And it was one of the most gorgeous things in my garden. Huge blooms that just lasted a really long time, look excellent in arrangements. They dry really interesting, so they give you a really long vase life. But Queen Lime Orange specifically is probably my favorite. All of the Queen Lime series is really beautiful. I grew Queen Lime Red. I didn't love the red variety as much, and it just didn't perform for me like the Queen Lime Orange. But there's also just Queen Lime Lime that is a green color, and it's also really beautiful. So all I have on me is Queen Lime Orange and Queen Lime Red, and I'm definitely going to grow more Queen Lime Orange this year because I didn't grow any last year. I grew different varieties zinnias, and I really miss those in my garden. So to fill space this coming year with a lot of those shrubs that I planted that are super small, I'm going to be growing some Queen Lime Orange. Now that is the Queen Lime series. So last winter, Jess and I were getting really excited about Florette's flower sale that happened, I believe it was around January 4th. And let me tell you, if you're against me in a competition of purchasing seeds when a seed store opens, you will most definitely lose because I am a checkout master. I get what I'm getting and then I get gone. And so last year I ordered a ton of varieties that Florette released on their website when the store opened that morning, and I got my hands on every zinnia that she sold minus one because it got missed in the order that they sent out and they had to reimburse me. But I have a ton of zinnias. This entire packet is zinnias, and yes, I went overboard, but if you save your seeds well, they will last a really long time. So last year I grew kind of a rainbow of zinnias, and I put those under the maples. This is Benary's Giant, most of these in here, and they look different than the Queen Lime, but they just produce these huge flower blooms that are absolutely gorgeous and beautiful and great to use in arrangements as well. Florette specifically is coming out with 2 lines of new zinnias she wasn't able to bring to market this year, but she's thinking she might be able to next year. So feel free fighting me next year when she releases those. You will probably lose, but hopefully we both get seeds. So there is basically any color under the sun in this packet that I have here. But last year I just grew a red, an orange, a green, a purple, a light purple, I think a pink, and just tried to go through the entire rainbow. Zinnias are not something that I would probably start ahead of time. They direct sow really well. This past year I actually used soil blocking to start my zinnias, and I will probably do that again this year. I never soil blocked anything, so we will go over that in the spring when I get these started. It will be later spring. And after doing soil blocking for zinnias specifically, I really enjoyed it, and how I didn't have to use any containers, and they were big enough that I could put directly into the garden when they needed to be potted up from the soil blocks. And so zinnia soil blocking is highly recommended by me, and we will be going over that process later spring. But come fight me for zinnias next year when Floret releases her new varieties to market. This is, of course, the plants that I've told you is a small variety of those things available to start from seed that are ornamental. I know there's a huge catalog. Floret has a ton of more stuff in her catalog. In My Gardener has more seeds in the flower collection, but this is primarily, I wanted to give you a list of the ones I've had success with, both starting in the basement, winter sowing in containers, direct seeding out in the garden, running the whole gamut. So if you don't have the option to start seeds inside, you can definitely stick some zinnia seeds in the ground right before or right after your last frost. They will germinate just fine, keep them moist, and you will have some beautiful zinnias giving you lots of color, lots of cut flowers to bring inside and decorate your home over summer and bring you lots of joy throughout the season. So I hope you enjoyed this video and it was helpful for you to see these varieties that I grow in my Zone 6. If you're interested in starting geraniums with me, I'll be starting that process in the next week or so. So go out to the big box store and pick you up some open pollinated geraniums if you want to go that route. And if you want to grow maverick type geraniums, find a seed source online. Any should be fine. One thing you should note is that geranium seeds are kind of expensive if you don't go for the open pollinated varieties. And so you're not going to get a bunch of seeds for a cheap price. I think they run around $30, and I'm not sure even how many seeds come in that packet, but they germinate really, really well. So your germination rate's almost 100%. Typically in all the instances I've tried geraniums, and they also germinate really quickly. So within a few days, you'll know if you've done something right or wrong as far as starting them from seed. But depending on which zone you live in, if you live in a northern zone like I do, you should probably get them started late January. It really depends on the climate and the location you're going to be growing them. If you're going to be growing them in your house, in a heated garage or a heated room, you may be able to start them a little bit later in February. I grow and start all my seeds in the basement, so it stays a little cooler in the mid to low 60s down there, and so they take a little longer to get going. They still germinate really quickly, but they sit for a while, so I do get them started on a heat mat. But after they get going, they get really, really large rather quickly, and then you can get them put out in your garden because they do take a while to bloom. So if you start them earlier, definitely get blooms earlier in the season, and you will be able to enjoy those and have your friends enjoy them and your family, and give some away to your friends or family if you're into sharing the things you've grown from your garden, like I know most of us are. So thank you guys for joining me. Feel free to stick around and watch any of my other videos. I will be starting the geraniums in a couple weeks, but I have a couple of more ideas planned for videos, and so follow along, like, subscribe, and comment below if you have any questions. And remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone. Bye.